Hello, everyone. This is Bill Even, and welcome to the National Pork Board's May 2023 Economic Update. Knowing everything that's going on in the industry here right now, we thought it'd be really useful to provide you with some information from Steve Meyer on our economic situation, as well as Kiersten, Hafer, and Courtney Knupp, both working at the National Pork Board on the demand and promotion side. So with that, let's go ahead and get started here today. I want to start off first with just acknowledging the antitrust statement. The National Pork Board does follow the antitrust laws of this nation. And so any information we present here today is designed to be in compliance with that. Next, just really the point I want to make is that your producer dollars are paying for the checkoff, and they're paying for the work coming from Dr. Meyer as well as from Courtney and Kiersten. That publicly available information is designed to help you in your business and make sure that you understand current market conditions and what the checkoff is doing on your behalf. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Steve Meyer, the lead economist for Partners with Production Agriculture. And Steve is going to talk to us about the current economic situation, what he's seeing driving production as well as demand. He's also going to touch on a little bit around what we know about California Proposition 12. Steve, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I appreciate the intro, and let's kind of get started here. We've got a lot of things to talk about in the pork industry these days. Unfortunately, not a lot of them are good, but let's discuss the reality of where we are and some things we might do. First, I need to show you a disclaimer. Partners for Production Agriculture is an introducing broker for StoneX. As such, we advise clients on the use of futures and options and other risk management tools, and those are risky, and so we're required to give you this disclaimer about that. We base all of our things on the best facts that we know, and so hopefully that's going to be what we do. That's certainly what we're going to do today, and so we'll go on into this. Key issues for the hog and pork markets, and these are things that we're going to talk about pretty much all of these today, except one. I'm going to bring it up, and we won't go into it in depth, but domestic U.S. consumer demand has been the key driver of our success over the last couple of years, and it is in some trouble. We'll talk about that in specific. Production costs, we think, have entered a new era, are not going back to where they were. Now, they're probably going to come down. We had a WASDE report last week that shows, the potential for over 2 billion bushel carryout on corn, and that's going to give us some price breaks for sure. We'll talk about some specifics there. Hog supplies have become an issue to some degree. This problem that we're in right now with prices is not driven by supplies, even though we have had a few extra hogs. Operational packing capacity could be a real issue at some point. I don't think it will be this fall. We've got some more line speed waivers that could be there, but we also have the ones last year that are going to be reviewed this fall. And then, of course, Smithfield closed their plant in Los Angeles in February, and it appears that High Life will be closing their Windham, Minnesota plant. Now, that plant is involved in a bankruptcy auction process right now, and it could be bought and kept open. Prop 12 has been all the news the last 5 days or 6 days, and so it's now the law of California. We'll talk about that a bit. African swine fever is still out there. We don't hear a lot of chatter about it, except in regards to the EU. But it's always a risk when it's nearby, and it's still nearby in the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And the last issue that we're not going to talk a lot about here is price discovery. The whole mechanism for determining the value of hogs and what they trade for between producers and packers is still, in my opinion, not very good. We're basing a lot of prices off of 1 to 2% of the hogs that are actually killed every day. And that system was no better last year and the year before when it discovered $120 and $130 hogs than it is now, discovering hogs, in the 70s and it might be other. The price discovered is not really relevant on whether the system is good. The system is still broken. All right, let's talk about the big news of the last week, and that's Prop 12. Of course, the Supreme Court on last Thursday announced a 5-4 decision that Prop 12 did not violate the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution and thus let Prop 12 stand by the at least under those grounds. Now, there could be some challenges on other grounds, but those are going to take time. by the statute. Prop 12 was enacted on January 1st of 2022, and that was the date that the definition of housed in a cruel manner became effective. A California district court then delayed the enforcement of the law. And first they said 180 days after the rules were promulgated. Well, the rules were promulgated in September. That meant they could have started in March. The parties to that lawsuit agreed to extend it to July, which include California Department of Food and Ag, agreed to extend that to July 1st. But that means that the enforcement was all that was delayed. And this is according to Dr. Elizabeth Cox at California Department of Food and Agriculture. So that says they're going to start July 2nd. Pork going into California has to be from a sow that complies with the law. Unlike the grandfathering clause that was around that December 31st, 21 and January 1st, 22 dates, because that was when it became effective, and that still stands. The enforcement was all that was delayed. And so by that, on July 2nd, my calculations probably somewhere between 5 and 8% of our production must find another market. It won't be able to go into California. And it also means that California is going to be way short on the amount of pork that they want to consume starting on July 2nd. Now, that's all according to the law that passed and the rules that were promulgated back in September. And Dr. Cox is an administrator. She's there to enforce the law and do what the law says and and those things. And so that's the information she has. Okay, so let's go into the economic situation. A good 21, a bad 22, and a much, much worse 23 is what we're looking at. You can see our forecast, or the costs as computed by Iowa State University, which we think represents the low-cost 25% or so of producers. We think the average producer is probably $6 to $8 higher than what this number is. And you notice that the average for March, which the hogs sold in March, was 103. And so that would put the average producer out there at somewhere near 110. The good news is the green part of this graph says that those costs are going to be going down. And that certainly helps. It takes us back into the mid 80s in 2024. But you notice, I mean, that's still 30% higher than where we were before. And so this profit outlook is definitely negative at the present time. Now, if we talk on the cost side, of course, what goes on the grain crop is really important. And you see kind of the middle column here of the WASDE report last week. And notice USDA put in their 181.5 trend yield. They adjusted some usage figures down here, and they've got a 2.2 billion carryout at the end of the 23-24 crop year. That's higher than we've seen anywhere else. And that took their estimated farm price down to $4.80 per bushel. What's shocking is we think that that's a bargain now. I mean, $4.80 a bushel was unthinkable not very long ago, but now it looks really good. And hopefully that comes to fruition because, as you can see here, let me get back to my slide. It's a darn sight better than $6.60, which is currently the forecast of what this year's season average price is going to be. Soybeans, kind of the same thing. They put in their acreages, harvested acres, their yield, come up with a crop of 4.5 billion bushels. And then the usage figures, somewhat higher crushings. I'm not sure about the crushings number here. And the reason is we've got a number of plant expansions and new builds that will come on during this crop year that might push that number up. But the real bottom line for us is 335 million bushels of carryout and a bean price that's down to $12. And again, it's kind of shocking to think that that's good. And that would put meal probably well under 400 bucks a ton. And we think meal is headed to 300 bucks a ton at some point, but it's going to take more of those crushing plants to be online. And of course, those are being driven primarily by the need for oil for biofuels. Planting progress has been very good. I mean, we're above the 5-year average. We're way ahead of last year. 60-some% of corn acres planted as of last week. If we look at on the bean side, almost half of those, and again, just about as good a planting pace as we had in 2020. And so I think this is a real positive and it put pressure on the market. And so, the week of May 12th futures 520 and 380, somewhere in that range, imply 2024 costs near $85. That's good, but it's still 30% higher than we were through most of 2020. And so in the long run, hog prices have to cover those costs. The only reason they have over the last couple of years is kind of blind dumb luck of having extremely strong consumer level demand, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. That demand has pretty well gone away at the moment and may be gone for good. We'll talk about that, but that puts us in a position where we've got to get hog prices high enough to cover these costs, and we may have to be reducing supplies to do it. So let's talk about demand. And of course, I'm going to go back to Econ 101 here on you, so I apologize for anybody that brings up very bad memories. But consumer level pork demand is defined as the quantities of pork that consumers are willing and able to buy at alternative prices. And notice that quantities and prices are plural there. It's a set of quantity price pairs, and the own price of the good, in this case, the price of pork or the price of hogs, if we're talking about hog demand, is part of the demand curve. The negative, and there's a negative relationship. You buy more at a low price, you buy less at a high price. And so if we go over here and look at this, that's the downward sloping line here called D. I mean, that's the negative relationship, different prices for different quantities that consumers are willing and able to buy. There are four factors that drive where and the shape of that demand curve. And that is prices of consumer goods, of competitor goods, and those are positive for demand. Beef, chicken, turkey, I don't know what other competitor, there might be seafood maybe, would be the most normal one. But if the price of those goes up, then the demand for pork goes up because there's substitution involved. Prices of complement goods are negative for demand, but there's not I don't ever know of one in empirical work that has been significant. An example I'll give you though is, did the egg prices last year hurt bacon demand? Because egg prices went up, people bought less eggs, or the quantity demanded went down. And did they buy less bacon because of that? I don't know the answer to that. I've never seen eggs come up significant in a pork demand estimation, but that would be the kind of things we're talking about here with complement goods. Finally, and then income levels of consumers are very important. I mean, you got more money, you can buy more. Positive for what we call normal goods. There's a class of goods called inferior goods that if you have more money, you buy less of. Finally, taste and preferences, the black box of how do consumers collectively think about your good. And there's lots of things that drive taste and preferences. One of the goals of your checkoff dollar is to influence consumer taste and preferences by putting out a positive view of producers and pork, showing that it's part of a healthy diet, and helping them with lots of ways to use that meets their individual preferences for flavor or mealtime or whatever it might be. So taste and preferences is out there, and it's very difficult to measure. I mean, that's one of those things you do with consumer panels, and normally it's proprietary. So we kind of use it as the black box. Notice that if you change the supply, and let's say we go from supply S prime up, which is a reduction in supply, to S, because it moves, that curve moves to the left in essence. If you change supply, it doesn't change demand. The demand curve here is exactly the same. It didn't move, right? All else constant, demand doesn't change, but the quantity demand does. It went down from Q prime to Q star, and the price went from P prime to P star. Okay, so notice that the higher price does not cause demand destruction, this term that's out in the vernacular of the market these days. We have demand destruction going on. Well, it's not really demand destruction. It's called a lower quantity demanded. You could call it volume destruction, or you could call it sales volume destruction maybe, but you can't even call it sales destruction because sales is in dollar terms. And because the demand for pork is inelastic, if you reduce the supply, the price goes up more than the quantity goes down, and total revenue actually goes up. So this is a little pet peeve, but I think it goes to illustrate that just because we change the supply that's available, that doesn't mean we change the demand at all. It just means that we change the quantity demanded because there's less available, and we use price in this case to ration the shorter supply. All right, demand is also a multi-level issue. And so we're going to start at the consumer end of this. and point out that, consumer level demand is a curve that looks just like I showed you there. And it is comprised really of the summation of demand at retail and demand at food service. And we think that the quantity of pork in these two things is pretty close to even. I can't tell you an exact percentage, but they go together to really comprise the consumer level demand for pork. Deduct retail and restaurant profits and costs from that, and you get a demand for wholesale pork. Okay, and those two entities, a domestic demand for wholesale pork, are the ones that buy the wholesale pork there. And if they have much higher costs, then the relationship of wholesale demand weakens relative to consumer demand because they have to cover more costs in that. Or if they have higher profit margins, it does the same thing. You add in export demand, export and wholesale and domestic markets both compete in the wholesale pork market. And so you add those to get to total wholesale demand. And then there's also this thing of offal and byproduct demand that really works at the wholesale level as well. Now, there's some consumer demand in the United States for these items, but most of them are exported. And so that's the real driver of offal and product demand, or offal and byproduct demand. And so when you take those two and put them together, that would be packer revenue, basically. And so we deduct packer costs and profits to get a hog demand. So it's a multi-level thing. And so just because one of them moves doesn't necessarily mean the other one does, especially at the same time. In fact, we observed wholesale demand as weakening way last fall in really August, September, October. And we saw a little bit of softness at the consumer level, but not nearly as much as we've seen at the wholesale and hog demands as we've gone through the winter and into the spring. So let's talk about consumer level demand. I use a measure called real per capita expenditures to try to gauge where consumer demand is. And this is beef, pork, and chicken. You add them together, and that's the number you get. It's $1. It's in 2019 to $21 here, and you deflate those to take out the impact of inflation, which has been major recently, and we'll talk more about that. But you can see that a lot of variability around the COVID shutdowns. First, demand was way down, then it was way up. But 2021 was record high when we added up. 2022 was another record high, increasing by 1.4%. But notice the observations in 2023. We've had some real weakness here, and especially in March, down sharply from a year ago, 9% year over year. Year to date is down 4.9 for these three species. Now, I omit turkey because I don't have a good retail price from USDA, and so using the one they have, I think, would be quite misleading. So what's caused this big shift in demand and now the softness? Well, I think it really goes back to income levels. And of course, this was driven in 2000 and 2021 by stimulus payments around the COVID shutdowns that was issued by the government, trillions of dollars of stimulus payments. In addition, there were increased SNAP benefits or food stamp benefits for many, many consumers. And I think the real key on this was when we handed all that money out, the economy was in such a position that there wasn't a lot of places, there were a lot of places you couldn't spend it. And so because of that, we saw savings jump dramatically from under $2 trillion in personal savings to over $6 trillion for a short time period. But notice what's happened. That's all gone now. I mean, we've had a reduction. The stimulus payments were well over a year ago, to a year and a half ago. We had the final reduction in SNAP benefits in 32 states in February. And so that savings is all gone. And so it looks to me like this stimulus, this huge amount of dollars put into the economy in consumers' hands, plus the fact that they couldn't go see a movie, they couldn't go do this, they couldn't go do that. That thing they wanted to buy wasn't available. There were lots of that for a couple of years. And one of the things they could buy was meat and groceries and food. And so I think we've seen that. I didn't see this as the big driver. That's a mea culpa. Historically, income levels have not been a big driver for pork demand and pork prices, but we've never had this kind of influx of income, especially at a time when you had limited spending opportunities. And so this, the red line is the M2, which is really the best measure of the money supply. Don't worry about this big jump in M1 here, the blue line, because that's because of the change definition. The important one is here. And of course, you can see the money supply went from about $16 trillion at the beginning of 2020 to almost $22 trillion in 22 at the end of 22. And of course, if you throw that much money into the economy, one definition of inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. And so guess what happened? The inflation rate went up, and we're still trying to rein it back in with some success, but it's been limited. The Fed would like inflation to run somewhere around 2%. So we're still well over their target rates. But if you look at where we are here, I mean, the thing they're doing is raising interest rates. And those interest rates will cost consumers some money on their credit card debt or on their variable interest rate mortgage, perhaps. And so that erodes even further the consumer income part that has supported this. All this goes together, and one of the things that has really changed is consumer sentiment. The observation there in July of 2022 is the lowest measure of consumer sentiment in the history of the University of Michigan survey. And they've been doing this for 40 years. And so it was a significant bottom. Now, the good news is we bounced off of that. The bad news is it's still not very good. But I'd certainly rather be going up here than not going up. So there is some hope for some rebound in consumer sentiment and possibly some rebound in consumer demand. One point I didn't make a while ago on that real per cap disposable income chart, one of the things on that is that it has been going up since the middle of last year. So even with high inflation rates, per capita disposable income has overcome those and actually gone up over the last 9 months. And so that's a positive too, that it's at some point could pay benefits on the demand side. If we look at individual species, of course, pork down sharply in March from a year ago. We're down almost 8% for the year. We were down the fourth quarter of last year by a growing amount, but we're still just barely under the 5-year average. So again, it's one of those, what have you done for me lately things that is not very good if we compare to the last couple of years, but if we compare to a longer history, things aren't too bad. Beef, the same way. Now, beef's demand problems started halfway through last year and have been going, they were double digits down most of the fourth quarter. Chicken, on the other hand, was up double digits the second half of last year and has just now kind of dropped back to year-ago levels. So think about the income thing. Which ones do you think lower incomes would hurt the most? I would say it would hurt beef first, pork second, and chicken last. And that's certainly what this relationship is showing us at this point. Real per capita availability or real per capita consumption. Okay, we need to remember that consumption is not demand. And one of the points we'll make here is our 2023 expectations for supplies will be down about 1.8% for total beef, pork, chicken, and turkey. The 2024 observation here is a forecast from the Livestock Marketing Information Center. And notice that even with these higher prices that we see, Americans are still going to consume about 220 pounds of those major 4 species. And so we're still going to have consumption here. The question is, at what price are we going to have it? If we look at just the pork part of this, we think per capita availability will be down slightly this year, 50.4 pounds. And the biggest reason for that is increased in exports. And we'll talk about exports here in just a minute. But the point I want to make about this chart, if we had this all the way back to 1980, virtually all of the observations will be between 50 and 52 pounds. It's been pretty flat, except for just a few deviations from it, especially there around the advent of the ethanol program and the drought of 2012. But we bounced right back up to 50, and we've been between 50 and 52 pretty much ever since then. I think that's, I'll take that and give you the feel for how much people will eat pork in the United States going forward. We look at retail prices, the other part of that demand equation. This is nominal retail prices. That's in current dollars as we look back historically. And we can see that they're off their record highs, but they're still very high relative to history, especially beef and pork. Pork are around $5 compared to around $4 in the past. And even chicken has gone up in nominal terms. If we put those in real terms, though, deflate them, I think they've been remarkably stable. A few wild swings on the beef side, but not very many wild swings on anything else. And notice that the real price of pork, the green line, has been lower this year than it was a year ago. And that's one of the big reasons we've seen some downward on our calculations about demand. Now, we do give some weekly data of retail prices. They come from USDA AMS. They're not really well designed for this kind of work, but we do the best we can. They're weighted by the number of stores. That's not ideal. But notice we've still been staying pretty close to last year in nominal terms. And so, we had a new record price last August, and the nominal was up about 10% last year. So far this year, a lot of volatility in the last several weeks. But I think that's good, because I think it indicates maybe some featuring on pork that we really need to do to kind of get this thing rolling again. If we look at the ratio of prices at the retail level, the blue and the green are kind of the important ones here: beef to pork and chicken to pork. And notice that they're very normal. So I don't think one species is leading the other in any stretch at the retail level yet. At the consumer level, the wholesale level is a little different. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So here is a scatter that shows the price and quantity, average price and quantity relationships in every year since 2002, I think, or 2000. And these can be interpreted as, in every year, that's the intersection of a supply and demand curve. That's where the equilibrium quantity and price was for that year. And you can see they fall kind of into some clusters of negatively sloped clusters, which is good for an economist because that supports our thought of a negatively sloped demand curve. And those got very soft in the 2006 through 2012 period, but came roaring back in 13 and 14, and then went off the charts in 21, 22. Very high demand. Now, the red line there represents this year's forecast per capita availability, 50.4 pounds. And the X is the average real price of pork so far this year, just under 420. And you can see that if that holds, then this demand curve has moved back down toward the pre-2021 levels. So not bad demand, but bad by what we've witnessed the last couple of years. Okay, so the bottom line on demand clearly has softened since mid-2022. That is for certain in my mind for pork and beef, and it kind of is beginning for chicken. I would expect them to do that in the order they have if it's an income-driven reduction. Most likely driven by higher transfer permits on the top side, and now softened by the end of those and inflation as it erodes buying power. So what can help pork demand? Remember the factors: taste and preferences, competitor prices, complement prices, income levels. Well, we can influence taste and preferences, but it's difficult and it takes a lot of time. Competitor prices are one that I think is going to probably come into play as quick as any, because we think beef prices are going to take off here some and lead the way here as they start retaining heifers to rebuild their cow herd. Chicken prices will help some. I mean, their high costs have to be covered. There was a lot of news last week about Tyson's earnings report, and they weren't making money anywhere, including chickens, because of high costs. And so I think those prices are going to help as well. And incomes and consumer attitudes, I think, are improving slowly, as I alluded to earlier. So the next piece of this is what goes on with exports. It's been good so far. March was 20% higher than February and almost 12% higher than a year ago. So far this year, we're up 8.3%. We ended the year last year down about 9% on exports. And so if we look at that in a chart on the left, you can see March was very good. That's the best month we've had since May of 2021, before the Chinese bailed out. Okay, so that was good. Mexico, Japan, and Korea, Canada were all higher year over year last month, very positive. And the current 2023 forecast from Global Agri-Trends and Brett Stewart, many of you know Brett, is up 5.5%. USMEF has us up 7% for the year. So that's going to siphon product out of the United States. And with only small growth in total output, it means that per capita availability here goes down, which is a point I made a while ago. The dollar index is down about 11% from its September peak. It's still a little bit higher than this 2015 to 21 range that it was in. So it's still probably hurting us in some markets, but it's not nearly as damaging as it was last fall, and I think is a factor that could help us going forward. So expectations for exports are, and you see the numbers from Brett Stewart from USMEF. USDA has us still only up 2% for the year. I think that's way too conservative. I think we're in a much better position. China's imports will probably rebound, but the question is, where do they come from? We have a 25% punitive tariff, and that we're not very competitive. And I know it's news to many of you, but the relationships between the United States and China just aren't very good right now. And so I don't think that they're coming to us. I think we're a supplier of last resort. But them buying from anyone else can help us in other markets around the world. And that's especially true for Canada, because they had all those plants that were delisted that have been relisted. And that means that the large amount, our imports last year were up about 14%, mainly on product coming from Canada. That product was coming here because it couldn't go to China. Now it can. So that helps us as well. Mexico will remain strong for U.S. pork. Whoops, sorry about that. I don't know where I went. Let's go back. Will remain strong for U.S. pork. You know, the question is, where else will they go? Well, they have an alternative now. I mean, product from Santa Catarina in Brazil was approved early this year. They're making some inroads, but we still have such a locational advantage on them. We have such a relationship advantage on Brazil. I still think that they're going to be in our market, and mainly in our market for hams. And finally, the big EU output reductions that are going on and much higher prices will certainly help us, the U.S. and export markets, and that's especially true of those in Asia. This is where USMEF thinks that we're going to have a real advantage. So put all those together, and now we come back to the wholesale level. Okay, we talked about consumer level demand a while ago, and now we look at wholesale level demand. And this falls along some of these negatively sloped lines, just like the other ones did. But notice where 2023 is, and this is based on my cutout value forecast and expectations of total pork availability, total U.S. consumption plus exports plus imports, which you know, the whole world competes at our wholesale level. So there you got to look at everything, and we're right back to the pre-2021 demand levels. This is not good. It's not good because it's worse than we've been in the last couple of years. But again, I'll point out that from a historical standpoint, this isn't terrible demand. One of the things that might change this is this relative wholesale price. And you can see blue here is beef to pork, green is chicken to pork. Both of them are very close to record highs. In fact, chicken to pork is a record high at the wholesale level. Beef is getting very close. Only one or two observations in history have been higher than the observation for March, which is the last one I have on here. And so, pardon me, this would be late April. Pardon me, this is weekly data. So what that says is that right now, pork should be a great profit opportunity for retailers and restaurants because it's cheaper relative to the other proteins. I was in front of a group of those last week. I tried to make this point very forcefully. I went on to point out that the margins on pork price, the price spreads, the wholesale retail price spread is record large. So there's plenty of margin to work with here to do some featuring. If we look at it on a percentage share basis, they're not really out of line too much. Kind of toward the top end for the wholesale retail. The farm is toward the bottom end. The packers kind of right in the middle. One point I'll make is packers have not benefited from this situation at all. They have struggled just like producers had in the last year or so. So if we look at the farm level, the same kind of thing holds. 2023 is going to be very close to the pre-2021 level of demand for pigs. In this case, we relate the national net price for barrels and gilts to total pork production. And you know, but it's still good relative to historic levels. And so it's one of those things. Yeah, we really had it good the last couple of years, and we don't right now. So the bottom line of pork demand, domestic demand is still good versus history, but below 21-22. Relative prices don't point to one species leading the way yet, but I think that's coming. I think that's very close by at the wholesale level. Many macro variables are still pretty strong, just a few exceptions, but the others are reasonably strong. You know, we've been talking about, oh, we're going to have a recession. We've been talking about for a long time. It hasn't happened yet. We'll see. Inflation is still hurting by being a drag on real income levels. Exports were bad last year on the wholesale and hog demands, They've certainly picked up this year, and I think they're going to be something that helps us as we go through 23. And finally, look for 5 to 6% growth in exports this year, maybe more, primarily to Asia, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. China is a big question. I'm not an optimist. And then long-term growth, we have 10 markets in South America, Central America, and the Dominican Republic that we have free trade agreements that are at some stage of being fully implemented. That is going to zero tariffs, zero quotas. And the population of those add up to about the same population as Mexico. So that's a real opportunity going forward on the export side. Okay, let's talk about supplies here. And again, we've spent a lot of our time on demand because demand is so important right now. I have 54 slides in this set, 39 of them dealt with demand. So we don't have many slides to go, but we want to talk about these supplies. This is the quarter of the Hogs Pigs from March. It came in very close to expectations. Notice that most of the numbers in the right-hand column are pretty close to zero. One that wasn't was the 180 and over number, and I don't know why the analyst pre-report didn't think that number was bigger, because slaughter in March was up 2% and USDA pegged it. The other numbers that are very different are the ones for farrowings and farrowing intentions. And if you look at USDA numbers, with a 100.5% breeding herd, and then all of those numbers, one of them barely below 100%, but the others significantly below. I don't know why they're so low. We didn't forget how to breed sows out here. And so I think those are too low. The other number on here that I think is noteworthy is the 0.7% increase in litter size. Back before COVID, we were growing at 1.3%. Since then, we've been pretty much flat, and I'll show you that here, right there. You can see we've been flat from 2020 really through to the end of 2023. We think that's going up again. And one of the reasons is the genetic capability of these animals has continued to get better. We've had problems with diseases and other things. The breeding herd here, you can see, has been relatively stable. The farrowing rate has declined a little in the USDA data. Now, I've postulated that Prop 12 would cause farrowing rates to decline because of the banned use of breeding crates. I don't know if that should have shown up yet, though, because Prop 12 is not in effect. We have some Prop 12 compliant farms out there, but USDA certainly has kind of reduced the farrowing rate here, and we'll have to watch that to see if that comes out in the wash here. USDA's farrowing intentions from this report would put that rate even lower. So I'm very skeptical of it. We'll see kind of how it plays out. But still, this litter size is the place where we can really grow productivity. And one of the reasons we've had trouble with productivity, of course, has been the 014 strain of PRRS. It has been so difficult. But notice the incidence of PRRS this year. The line here, 17.2% of the sow farms in this large sample, it's about 3 million sows, about half of the U.S. breeding herd, is the lowest ever so far. And they start in July and take accumulation of that. And you can see it's just not as bad as it has been from an incidence standpoint. Now, the severity of this strain, I said 144 strain, the severity of this strain is still quite high. But still, I don't think we're any worse off, and we're possibly and maybe likely better than we were last year on this. The other one is we've got better labor situations on our sow farms. So we think that productivity is going to take back off again. Our forecast for slaughter on a weekly basis is the black line here. Notice that the red with diamonds has been running kind of consistently 1% or so above what we thought. Now, last week we were right on the money. This week, I think we're going to be close, and we've got right at 2 million for the week involving Memorial Day. So maybe we're kind of coming back to it. But so far, actual slaughter has run about 1% above what the March report would have suggested. And we kind of thought that. We thought the 120 to 179 category might have been a little low. So this is not a real surprise to us. But notice also the black line does get right up against what will be our slaughter capacity this fall, we think. Now, I've taken out of that capacity figure the closure of Smithfield at Los Angeles, and I assume that the plant at Wyndham is going to close. I may be wrong on that. And so if I'm wrong on that, that green line will be a little bit higher. That's not a dire situation on capacity for the fourth quarter. It's not unusual for us to run a few weeks above that line. We make it up with some extra Saturday work. But that line, this capacity line assumes 5.4 work days per week, and that's kind of the number that historically has said we can do pretty easily, and it's kind of where we start having some real price impacts. Weights are telling us that we're quite current in our markets, especially the producer weights on the left. We're actually below the 5-year average now by about 2 pounds, which doesn't surprise me much given the cost of production. I mean, with the market softening and very high costs, we should be selling these hogs at lighter weights and not putting so much feed in them. The packer raised pigs on the right, they're much higher and much larger animals. They obviously are feeding to try to keep tonnage going through a plant. And so they don't change quite as much as the other ones, but notice they too are moving back toward the 5-year average pretty quickly here. So has expansion changed to contraction? The sow slaughter as a percent of the breeding herd is not clear on that yet. You really have to get up to 1% of the breeding herd per week to have a contraction. We're not there. We're certainly above the 9/10 that says we're growing. I don't think we're going there. So we're watching this pretty closely. I don't think we have a clear indication yet. The other situation that's out there is what about the Quebec situation? And I haven't made any adjustments yet on this. So Ole Mill is closing their Valley Junction plant with the second shift closing in September and the first shift in December. They're going to reduce Quebec slaughter by about 1 million head per year, beginning in June. 850,000 of those would be Quebec hogs, about 150,000 of Ontario hogs. We should see weaner and feeder pigs begin to flow south from up there because you're going to have feeders in Quebec that won't have a place for those hogs to go in the fall. Well, the problem is, of course, if you check the wean pig price last week, I think it was $10 and change. So you can't even afford to ship them down here. I have not heard of any talk about euthanizing pigs up there. If they keep them and feed them, then they're going to come here in the fall as market hogs. I think we're going to see more market hogs from Quebec, at least for a time. Now, they've adopted a producer-funded buyout plan, but that will take sows out now and won't result in a reduction of market hogs for 8 to 12 months. And so I think we're going to see some growth of hogs from Quebec, even if we got all 1 million of this reduction that Ole Mill is going to try to do from June onward. That's only 1% of our slaughter. So it's not needed, it's not good, but it's not a flood. And so I'll make that point. What about the Smithfield situation? I don't know enough to comment. I've kind of exhausted that. I'll make a bold prediction that Smithfield is not going to be the only one to reduce sow numbers. Even among the large producers out there, I think we're going to see quite a bit of it. Our slaughter forecasts for the year are in gray, the gray shaded area. You can see that for the year, we're up fractionally about 0.8%. All of that is due to 600,000 plus that we moved from December of last year into January of this year. If I took those 600,000 head out, we would be down, would be about 125.7. We'd only be up 2 or 3 tenths from last year. It would not be very much. And so that's a bit of a goofy thing in the numbers this year. But still, the point is marginal growth. We've got some growth in the fourth quarter, but remember that fourth quarter for last year should have been 600,000 head bigger. Okay, so if it was, then we'd see very little growth in the fourth quarter this year. So that's messing up these year-over-year numbers pretty dramatically. Price forecast. This is I hate these. I mean, they are very low, but I think they really fit with the data. We think that these cash hogs are going back. This is second quarter prices. You can see where the futures are. We still think the futures are actually good selling opportunities for the rest of this year, at least until today. I noticed they started down pretty hard in early trading today. 75 to 78 is going to be well under cost of production for this year, even for good producers. And so we think that there's going to be some reductions here because of losses, and we can't make much of it up in our price forecast. This is the scatter diagram again. You can see where we are right now with our forecast for net prices. To get back to profitability, we would have to have about a 12% increase in demand, a move straight up to the X right there. or we would have to have about a 14% reduction in supply to move us all the way back over here and get us back up to that price level. And we're not going to see a big reduction in supply, especially of that magnitude. Maybe we could get an increase in demand, but that's a difficult challenge, especially over a short time period. Okay, what do I expect for the next few years? A smaller sow herd given current loss outlook. There won't be any growth until we get some more capacity. We'll get more of that in just a minute. A return to 1 to 1.5% growth in litter size. The animals can do it. If we control disease and get labor in those barns, we're going to grow litter sizes rapidly. We have lots of genetic capability out there. Some decline in aggregate litters per breeding animal. That's especially true with the fact that Prop 12 is going to be there. No breeding crates equals a lower farrowing rate. And so we're going to have to kind of adjust to that, or at least I am in my forecast. Slow growth for exports. China, and I'm not an optimist on this one. Our main opportunities, I pointed out, were those markets that are going to become fully implemented on our free trade agreements. We're going to have some growth this year. It's going to be a while before we get back to those 2019 records. Domestic demand, softer at present, maybe no respite. I mean, we talked about the factors that have to change here, but I don't think the new habits or taste and preference have really held on. I think it was money that really drove this, and now the money's gone, and so we have some challenges there. If we look at foreign animal disease, of course, this is a huge deal. Low probability, high, huge impact if it comes. And we've done a good job, and we've gotten more resources against this, and so I'm optimistic we can keep these out. Long-term labor supply for both packers and producers, this is still going to be an issue. I don't see it waning anytime soon. Some deal on immigration reform or seasonal worker visas would really help, but I think over time we're just going to see more mechanization. I think that's virtual certainty for plants. We'll see as much as we can do at the farm level, but we're a little more limited. Physical capacity growth or just maintain? Well, line speeds are the most immediate growth opportunity. There are a few more plants that could get it, but those are going to be relatively small. And the ones that got it last year are going to be up for review in November. Now, we have heard no problems with food safety or worker safety that would cause those to be a problem, but that's just a caveat. Prestige Holstone merger. We think the activities putting the companies together is going to prevent double shifting at either one of their plants this year and maybe even next year. We understand that the new Sioux Falls plant is on hold now pending this merger. And finally, Coldwater has some rumblings of adding a second shift, but they're going to have more cooler space to do it. And then finally, that price discovery determination system that I brought up earlier still needs to be fixed. So with that, I'm going to have to sign off, and I'll send it back over to Bill.
Steve, thanks so much for that update on what's going on in the market and what is currently happening. I really appreciate you engaging with our producers, as well as giving us some updates on what to expect over the course of the summer. Next, I'd like to turn to Kiersten Hafer, our Vice President of Domestic Market Development here at the National Pork Board. Kiersten's going to give you a quick snapshot of some things that the Checkoff's been doing behind the scenes here this winter, as well as talk about the meat case study and the real improvement we're seeing in our product, as well as our summer blitz and some of the work that the Checkoff is doing on your behalf in the United States. Kiersten, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bill. Would love to talk to you today about some of the work that we're doing to build demand domestically. And we know that as far as pork's path to creating more value and volume, that we've got to be in more households and reach more consumers more consistently and give them more eating occasions for pork. And that really boils down to us having a strong penetration strategy. How do we get into those households across the country? How do we grow their share and the amount of pork they're buying? And then how do we grow their use? And that really comes down to us positioning pork, selling more pork, or increasing the value of it. So today I want to talk a little bit about how we're doing that. And you've heard us speak over the last year about ground pork and some of the success we're having there. We're making key cuts, everyday items. Ground pork is a great example of that. And what we found is that we've gotten to a point where we've been able to penetrate more households across the U.S. It's not only being included in major grind sets, and it's not only increasing in its distribution at retail, but we're finding that more people are buying it and including it into their everyday purchases. We saw over 600 households buying ground pork versus a previous year. And we saw that the space in stores increased by at least a foot in each store. That's up from 2022. We also know that 96% of the retailers that we visited as part of our retail meat case benchmarking study were now carrying ground pork in their set. And that's really up about 30 points from the last study that we completed in 2018. So we're not only growing our penetration in stores, but we're growing our penetration in consumers' households. And we know that shoppers are buying it more often. In some of the test and learns that we've completed over the last year, we've added some different fat to lean ratios, and we know that's bringing a new consumer to ground pork and to the meat case. And with that, they're finding new reasons to purchase, and they're buying more often. We've removed 30 days from the purchase cycle with consumers in a couple of the retailers that we've partnered with. And on average, those retailers that have introduced a ground meat set, included ground pork in that set, and made it an everyday item, they're seeing a sales increase of about 20% in their stores. And it really comes down to, we're giving consumers additional reasons to purchase and additional reasons to consume it. And you'll see here some examples of what's happening in retail to drive that additional demand. We've got ads that are encouraging consumers to add ground pork as they're shopping online, and we're giving them some examples of recipes and ways that they could be using it, and we're tying that to the way that the retailer is promoting ground pork. So all of those things are helping to keep ground pork front and center with consumers and keep them buying. Overall, we continue to make a lot of progress. We had a very limited focus for the last couple of years in working with retailers to grow distribution of ground pork, and now we're taking those results to all retailers across the U.S. So we continue to gain distribution. We continue to make it an everyday item. We continue to partner with retailers so they understand their opportunity to grow in the ground pork product set. And we know that retailers are adopting it. They're bringing in more items. They're giving us more space. They're bringing in burgers as a part of their distribution and expansion. And on average, we see that ground pork is up about 3.4% on a yearly basis over the last couple of years. And again, we're finding that the work that we're doing on behalf of the industry and you is really starting to pay off. We've got a major retailer in the Southeast that added ground pork to their set and saw 16% growth in sales in those stores. We have a major club store that took on ground pork that didn't offer it previously. So that's 100% incremental sales and opportunity for them to pull consumers in. And then we've got a major regional Midwest retailer that was up 4% just by adding ground pork and creating some focus there. So that's one of the ways that you've heard us talking about how we're incorporating some of the work and putting it into place in the marketplace and getting consumers to engage a little bit differently with pork. One of the other ways that we're creating demand is among key consumers, and this really focuses on our multicultural marketing efforts. Within multicultural, we focused on the Hispanic population, and we've launched into a conversation with them that not only positions fresh pork, but really starts to tie to health messaging. And we went into 5 of the top 10 Hispanic markets with Pond Lay pork, and translated that means add pork. We were able to go talk about the role of pork as a high added value protein to what they're doing in trying to balance their diets and adding more vegetables and fruits to their diets. And what we found was in the markets that we entered, in 5 of the top 10 markets, we actually grew households. We grew an additional 228,000 households by the work that we did. And we increased sales in 3 of those markets by $24 million. And again, we got people purchasing pork more often. So the number of days in 3 of those 5 markets decreased. And that's the one time we like to see a decrease, is in the number of days between their pork purchase. So the multicultural efforts that we have put in place are truly showing us that we are on the right track with this consumer and that what we're doing is resonating. So in those 5 markets, we saw those positive increases. In the 5 markets we didn't enter, we actually saw that pork was eroding and was declining in household penetration, sales, and volume. So we're going to continue to stick with it. And we've got some examples of what really broke through and helped to drive consumer interaction. We're not only in market talking about what pork offers in terms of variety and versatility, and again, the health benefits, but we're also tying it to retail execution. So we're working directly with retailers to ensure that what we're talking about and the elements of pork and the viability of pork is brought directly to the retail set and how they're making purchases in the store. So with all of that, influencers, in-store media, the market activation, we're seeing the results. And that work will continue through the end of this year. We're also thinking about the here and now, and how do we drive demand now coming into our key selling period. So we've got a Win Bigger drive and Blitz planned for the summer. And that really comes down to us focusing on the next 15 weeks, May to September, really ensuring that pork receives its share of the major holidays. We know that 77% of fresh pork category volume is in chops and ribs. And coming into those summer holidays, it's critical that we win with those 2 products. So we've got to focus on the biggest opportunity markets and retailers that we know will move volume to drive demand now. We're going to focus on chops and ribs across the country in 5 major states where we know a lot of this volume takes place. We identified the key markets, and we know that 5 states represent about 37% of pork volume. And within those markets, we've identified the retailers that we know will give us the biggest opportunity to sell and capture that share. So we're going to turn consumers into shoppers, and we're going into LA, New York, Houston, San Antonio, Miami, and Chicago. And we're going to be partnered and doing things in that market that drive to stores and retailers like Walmart, Costco, Sam's Club, Publix, ShopRite, Aldi, Ralph's, H-E-B, Vons, and Stop and Shop. We know that they have the consumer that we're looking for, and we're going to connect what we've got to offer in terms of chops and ribs with how they're shopping. So we've got a pretty large campaign in place with Ad Adapted, where we're going to encourage people to add pork to their shopping list or to their cart. And you'll see some examples of that creative here and how we're positioning pork as an option and as a solution during those key holiday timeframes. It's going to be an opportunity to remind people to consider pork, to purchase pork, and to prepare pork. Maybe it's a concept of eat chops during the week and ribs on the weekend. We've got you covered. So we have that in place and available to support a lot of the efforts to drive demand now. And it's not just about retail. We're doing a lot in the food service space as well. And you'll see an example of Del Taco, where we've got a premium protein focus. It's a returning menu item for the first time since 2017. And we had done a lot of work in menu concept development with Del Taco in 2017 to bring this product and these LTOs forward. And they paused them for a number of years, but now they're back and they're going to be offered in 600 locations across 15 states. And it's going to be a 12-week LTO. So not only will consumers have the ability to consume pork at home and have reasons and recipes to do that, but we're going to be hitting them in food service in some concepts that we believe they'll be able to experience pork in a new and different way. Another great example of the work that the demand team is doing is EG America. And EG America is the 4th largest convenience store operator with over 1,700 stores in 30 states. And they are launching the Big Pig Sandwich. It's a returning LTO, and that limited time offer is going to be in place from June 21st through September 5th. And this sandwich is phenomenal. It's got a lot of pork packed into it. It's got a sausage patty, some ham and bacon, and it's going to be promoted through all those locations at the pump, in the store, in print and video. And all of the funding that has been put against this program that the National Pork Board has invested, EG America is investing back in their stores to promote the sandwich. So we're really excited that the Big Pig is back and that we're going to be able to be showcasing that through the summer months. As we think about demand, those are some of the things that we're doing in the here and now to drive demand through the summer months. And we're also taking a long-term view. And that really boils down into, we're going to take the approach that we used for ground pork and the success that we've experienced there and apply it now to the loin. We know that the loin is a drag on the cutout. We know that we've struggled for a number of years to really be able to derive and drive the value of the loin. And we're going to go a little bit deeper than we've done before and take a lot of what we've learned through the ground pork test and learns and unlocking that growth potential and apply it to that loin. We know there's been significant investments on behalf of the industry in genetics, in raising practices, in production and processing practices. And really it comes down now to the consumer pull-through. So we're going to be talking a lot about how do we create a conversation with consumers that starts to explore and reframe the loin. And you'll see that work playing out as part of a task force through the end of 2023. And then in the partnerships that we establish with retailers, food service operators, and the packer processing community. So we look forward to sharing more about the loin with you in the coming weeks and months. And we are very excited to be working on your behalf and sharing a lot of the examples of how we're building demand on behalf of the pork industry. Thanks so much, and back to you, Bill.
Kiersten, thanks so much for that information on what the Checkoff is doing in the product side here in the United States. I know just this past week, we spent a time in Minneapolis with the nation's largest retailers as well as packers, talking to them about the opportunities in pork, the fact that our product is much better, and really leaning in on them, saying we've got an opportunity here to move product. And that's going to be the focus as we go through the summer. Next, I want to look at the international side of the market and with Courtney Knupp. Courtney is our Vice President of International Market Development, and we do have some good news and some favorable trends on the international side. So Courtney, I'll turn it over to you to give the producers an update from your part of the world.
Thanks, Bill. The National Pork Board is laser focused on demand creation for pork and pork products. It's in fact our mission to ensure we invest to create the most value for every part of the pig every day, whether that destination is at home or abroad. U.S. pork exports finished 2022 as a top 3 record year, valued just over $7.6 billion and representing 27.5% of our pork production. It was estimated to have contributed almost $61 towards the value per head slaughtered in 2022. This year, our exports are off to an extremely strong start, with the first quarter reaching a value of just shy of $2 billion. That's up over 15% over 2022's first quarter. Realizing the world has had many factors affecting the global pork market in the last 5 years, including a global pandemic, currency fluctuations, inflation, China demand, and geopolitical conflict, just to name a few, pork producer investment in international market development is yielding long-term results, which is the objective of our marketing strategy. When we look at 2023 export value to date compared to the 5-year average, we've seen a 7% value increase, while volume for the same period increased 3%. Investment in international marketing aims to increase value over time, and we're pleased to be seeing that come to fruition. The National Pork Board, on behalf of U.S. pork producers, invest in the international space through strategic partnerships, and that's with the U.S. Meat Export Federation and the United States Department of Agriculture. And we promote U.S. pork and pork products in focal, established, and developing markets. Additionally, the Checkoff conducts market research and analysis on behalf of our industry in order to provide insights and opportunities to differentiate our products and diversify the markets in which we export to. Our international efforts have enabled U.S. pork to have the brand reputation of being high quality, consistent, and safe. We work to build demand for pork consumption in developing markets and create more opportunities to compete for that market share. And with our partners, we seek to establish strong relationships between U.S. exporters and importers while conducting promotional initiatives to introduce new products into the market, while educating and providing training on how to fabricate, prepare, and merchandise U.S. pork to create more value for the category. We're optimistic about the opportunities to grow our business and value through exports, which enable our industry to maximize carcass utilization, especially for those cuts not largely consumed domestically like variety meats. And we're proud to showcase to our customers that we do so efficiently, competitively, and sustainably. U.S. pork is strongly competing in the Western Hemisphere and Asia Pacific markets, where we see tremendous opportunity for development and growth. Our traditionally strong export markets like Japan, South Korea, and Mexico continue to be shining stars. In fact, last year, Mexico became our #1 value and volume market. The National Pork Board and the U.S. Meat Export Federation are committed to creating and capturing opportunities for U.S. pork and pork products this and in future years, just like we have done by investing in international marketing since we became a net exporter over 20 years ago. Back to you, Bill.
Courtney, thanks so much for giving us an update on the international, as well as Kiersten on the domestic side, and again, Steve, for what's going on the econ side in the market. Just a couple closing thoughts here. We want you folks out there in the countryside to know that we are very well aware of what's going on in the market and what's happening on the farm. That's why we provided this information for you today. We also want you to reach out to us if you've got any questions and wondering how we're putting your dollars at work for you. So please come and visit us at World Pork Expo if you happen to be in Des Moines and able to come in on June 7th to the 9th at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. We'll have our hospitality tent for you, as well as a booth inside. We've got a series of Pork Academy sessions I think you'll find very useful. But most importantly, the ability to talk to your Checkoff staff, ask some questions around what's going on, how are you deploying my dollars, and give us your ideas on what you'd like to see done. Ultimately, this is your organization. Our 15-member producer board of directors is directly involved in all of this as well, and you will get a chance to see and talk to them at World Pork Expo if you happen to be in town. The other thing they can do is make sure that you're subscribing to our email updates. We do push out information that's relevant to all of you and what's going on at the Checkoff. Here's your opportunity. You can see it at the bottom of the slide. It's porkcheckoff.org/email. There's plenty of ways to get signed up for information that you would find valuable, and we're always interested in hearing what's the best way to get information to you. And then closing, here's my email address as well as my phone number. I've been fielding a lot of telephone calls from a lot of you folks out there, and I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with each and every one of you. But it's not just me. Anybody on the Pork Board staff is here to work on your behalf. So again, thank you for your time, and let us know if you found this information valuable. Let us know what else you would like to see and hear, and we're happy to put together another webinar and get that information out to you in whatever fashion you find best. Thanks much, and have a safe spring.